Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Haley Deshane, and I'm the events coordinator here at Eco Canada. Welcome to the Energy Efficiency Employment in Canada Insights from the 2024 Report webinar. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to recognize the traditional Indigenous lands where Eco Canada's office is based in Calgary. At Eco Canada, we're committed to working towards respectful acknowledgement, collaboration, and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples across Canada. This starts with acknowledging our honor and privilege to live and work within the Treaty 7 territory. Today we are presenting from the City of Calgary, home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. We would also like to take this time to acknowledge the traditional territories and oral practices of the Niitsitapi home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina and Goodstoney, which include the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. I would also like to go over a couple housekeeping items for today's session to ensure that everyone can enjoy and participate in our session effectively. So first off, all the participants are muted, so please check your audio settings to ensure that you can hear us properly. If you have any technical issues, please use the question box and select Eco Canada, and we'll try and help you as best as we can. The webinar will also be recorded and sent out within 24 hours after this presentation. And any questions that you have about the presentation or today's topic can be submitted through the chat box or question box. We will have a dedicated time during the presentation to answer any questions from the audience. So just to give you a little bit more information about us, Eco Canada's vision is to build the world's leading environmental workforce. Eco Canada seeks to help environmental workers succeed at each step of their career journey. To do this, Eco Canada has developed programs tailored to individuals at different stages of their career. For those looking to enter the environmental workforce, Eco Canada provides training through the BEAR program and accreditation for environmental programs at post-secondary institutions. Eco Canada also provides opportunities for new workers to break into the environmental sector through wage funding and co-op students for recent post-secondary graduates. For those already employed as environmental workers, Eco Canada provides the Environmental Professional, or EP, and Environmental Professional in Training, EPT, certifications and EPT students. Lastly, Eco Canada provides opportunities for those with vast experience as environmental workers to provide guidance and direction to Eco Canada's products and programs through advisory committees and membership. Now I would like to introduce you to our speaker. Joining us today is Geni Peters. Geni is the Director of Research at Eco Canada, a not-for-profit with a mission to ensure that Canada has the environmental workforce it needs in these challenging times. An economist with a PhD from Texas A&M University, she is responsible for the management, execution, and delivery of environmental labor market information and national occupational standards projects, working with an army of professionals comprised of staff, consultants, strategic advisors, and subject matter experts. All right, Geni, take it away.
Thanks, Haley. Well, thank you to all of you for joining today. I'm really excited to be able to present the findings from our 2023 survey of energy efficiency employers in Canada. This is actually our second iteration of this particular type of research. We did a research in a very similar vein back in 2019. And so we've got a little bit of information to compare and contrast what we found before. But just to give you an overview of why we're doing this research, one reason we're doing this research is because we were asked by Natural Resources Canada whether we could help them understand what the energy efficiency workforce looks like in Canada, what the opportunities look for, what the hiring challenges are, and what and whether it compares to what's going on in the United States in particular. The model we used for the research is a US study called the US Energy and Employment Jobs Report, which is published on an annual basis down in the US. This particular research is conducted nationally, but we're also providing some regional data in this particular version of the report. So we've got some data on energy efficiency employment and revenues by geographic region, including all of the provinces and then the territories combined. We've got an assessment of the workforce size of 6 industries directly involved in the supply of energy efficiency goods and services in Canada. We've also asked these energy efficiency employers about their export capabilities this time around. And then we wanted to quantify what the output of these industries is in the energy efficiency space. So basically, what's the GDP impact of energy efficiency in Canada? Let's move to the next slide. So our methodology. We conducted a survey, a national survey. I believe we reached out to about 10,000 different industry or business establishments across Canada through telephone and web survey. That was conducted between November 13th, 2023 and January 9th, 2024. Of all those that we reached out to, we received responses, good responses from 2,694 business establishments in Canada, which gives us a really good level of statistical certainty that the information we're providing is a representation of what's really going on out there in the energy efficiency workforce. We focused our attention on 6 industries where energy efficiency employment is most likely to be found in Canada: the construction sector, the manufacturing sector, wholesale trade, professional and business services, utilities, and other services. Other services includes organizations that are involved in installing and maintaining equipment, as well as not-for-profit organizations. The overall distribution of the energy efficiency workforce is not even across all of these different sectors. Some of these sectors are much larger than others. So we'll take a deeper dive in and we'll take a look at where this energy efficiency workforce is employed. So let's go on and let's take a look at some of these findings. Let's just back up a couple of slides. Perfect. Thank you, Haley. So if we take a look at the energy efficiency sector, and particularly the contribution of each of these 6 industries to energy efficiency activities in Canada, we see that the construction sector makes up about 75%, maybe a little bit more than 75% of the 55,000 energy efficiency employers that we estimate to be in Canada. So that's a vast majority of the establishments across Canada. At the same time, the construction sector makes up a little bit less than say 40% of the energy efficiency operating revenues generated from these activities in Canada. Wholesale trade has a much larger energy efficiency operating revenue contribution than the other sectors, other than construction as well. But if we take a look at the utility sector, we see the utility sector is teeny tiny in terms of the number of establishments, but a little bit larger in terms of the energy efficiency operating revenues that it provides. Let's move to the next slide. Perfect. So here's a deeper dive into the actual output generated by energy efficiency employers across Canada. Down at the bottom, you can see that there is a little bit more than $1,030 billion in total output through energy efficiency activities in these 6 industries alone. When we look at the share of energy efficiency activity or the share of output for the six industries, that's about 3.5%. So we are looking at just a small portion of the overall activity in each of these sectors as well. Construction again makes up the largest chunk of output in the energy efficiency space with about $20.9 billion. Other services is down there at the bottom with only about $500 million in energy efficiency output across Canada. Let's move to the next slide. As I mentioned, we also asked these energy efficiency employers about their export activities. And when we did, we asked them two questions. One was, does your business currently export energy efficiency products or services outside of Canada? The other is, are you export ready? So let's look at the first question here. We see that the vast majority of employers across Canada, 86.3%, are not engaged in any export activities with regard to their energy efficiency products or services. About 5.3% are exporting just energy efficiency products. Another 2.6% are exporting just energy efficiency services. And then another 3.8% are exporting both energy efficiency products and services across Canada. So let's see what's going on in terms of the export readiness. We know that 86.3% are not currently exporting. Let's see if they're planning to export in the next slide. So here's our second question. Is your company export ready? And the responses again vary. Again, we see another 85.4%. So the vast majority of those who said no to whether they export are also saying no, we don't intend to export either. So energy efficiency activity is largely a nationwide activity and contained within the nation's borders. We do see some that are ready to export and a few that are intending to get ready for export over the next little while. Another about 3 or 4% looking to be export ready over the next 3 years or so. But again, this is largely a domestic industry that we're looking at. Let's move to the next slide. Perfect. So here are our overall findings. When we take a look at energy efficiency across Canada, we see that there are more than 466,000 permanent energy efficiency workers in these establishments. And they're contributing about 16.7, or they're earning about $16.7 billion in employment income. The distribution of the workforce across Canada is reasonably close to the distribution of the provincial populations, with Ontario having the largest chunk of energy efficiency workers at 194,000. Quebec and British Columbia are in the 90,000 range for energy efficiency workforce, and then Alberta follows in fourth place with just over 41,000 energy efficiency workers. When we take a look at the distribution or split of energy efficiency activity by the type of sub-technology that is being produced or used, we see that if energy efficiency lighting is one of the top sub-technologies in the energy efficiency space in Canada, followed by traditional heating, ventilation, and air conditioning goods, control systems, and services. We see here a comparison also of the activity in terms of the employment across these different sectors between our 2018 study and our 2023 study. And we see that there has been a slight increase in the number of workers in most of these sectors. the increase, however, is a little bit smaller than we had actually forecasted or had been anticipated back in 2018. And there are a couple of reasons that we attribute to that we'll get into a little bit later on. The first, of course, is that between 2018 and 2023, we had a pandemic, and that pandemic drastically reduced the amount of economic activity across the board and also made it more challenging for installers and repair people and those sorts of employees to get into people's houses to do the retrofits and to install the equipment, the energy efficiency equipment. So that slowed down the growth of the energy efficiency workforce a little bit less. We had a little bit less growth than we had anticipated seeing back in 2019. If we consider the energy efficiency workforce demographics, we asked about three demographic groups. We asked about female versus male. We asked individuals who had a post-secondary certificate or higher. And we also asked about Indigenous workers. When we take a look at the demographics of the sector in terms of female participation, we see that almost 2 in 10 of Canada's energy efficiency workers identified as female in 2023. That's much lower than the proportion of Canada's workers across all industries who identify as female. That said, we think back to the fact that energy efficiency is largely in the construction sector here in Canada, with 75% or more of the establishments engaged in energy efficiency activity are construction enterprises. And we know that construction has typically had a lower proportion of female workforce than other industries. So we can assess this as representing largely the fact that the construction sector dominates this energy efficiency workforce space. We also see that 7 in 10 of Canada's workers overall hold a post-secondary degree of some sort or a post-secondary certificate, whereas less than 4 in 10, in fact, just a little bit more than 3 in 10 energy efficiency workers hold a post-secondary degree or certificate. There are pluses and minuses to this. One is that it means that there are lots of opportunities for workers who don't have advanced education to find employment in the energy efficiency space. Often this work is going to be in manufacturing, where the employers are often willing to take people in who don't have ready experience and train them up on the equipment that they're going to be using in the manufacturing space. It also reflects some of the uh, uh, unskilled labor activities in the construction sector as well. In terms of the Indigenous representation, we see that about 4% of the workers overall in Canada are Indigenous workers, and that proportion is a little bit lower in the energy efficiency space with about a 3% representation of Indigenous workers. In addition to finding out what the energy efficiency employment looks like in Canada, we also ask these employers, what are your hiring challenges? Are you having a hard time finding workers for your enterprise? And we see that there is a lot of challenge when it comes to finding workers across the board. Mainly, we see that in the construction sector, more than 90% of the employers who were interviewed said that they were having a very difficult or somewhat difficult time finding the staff that they need. In contrast, in the manufacturing sector, almost half of those interviewed said that they were not having any difficulty finding workers. Again, this could reflect the willingness of manufacturing firms to take in unskilled workers and train them up so that they can become productive on the assembly lines, whereas construction sector employees may require a little bit more in terms of training and skills coming into the job uh, before they get hired. In some of the other sectors, we see similar challenges. 17 to about 24% of the employers in these other sectors said that they were having no difficulty hiring, with about 70 or 80% looking and saying that they do have challenges hiring as well. The two largest sectors, the other services sector and the construction sector, are largely having trouble finding installation and maintenance equipment workers, which we'll see as we get into some of the next slides. So when we asked about the challenges that these employers were having hiring, we asked them, what are your top 3 occupations that you're having trouble hiring for? Across the board, installation workers or technicians were a challenge for these employers to find. 65% of the employers estimated interviewed in the construction sector said they were having challenges finding installation workers or technicians, and 42% of other services employers said the same thing. A couple of other roles stick out as well. We see that managers and supervisors are also a challenging role to hire for, as well as sales positions in these particular enterprises. Other than that, we see that in the professional and business services sector, engineers, architects, analysts, and consultants can be a challenge to hire. In the manufacturing sector, there's some difficulty hiring production positions. About 8% said that they had trouble hiring for their production positions. And in the other services sector, about 16% of the employers said that they were having trouble hiring drivers or transportation or warehousing workers. Let's take a look at the next slide and see what some of the top reasons for hiring difficulties are based on the employer surveys that we've done. So the top reason for most of these particular industries was that they are observing that there's a lot of competition for workers, or likewise a small applicant pool. So they're not getting a lot of different applicants for their job postings. Again, the other services sector and the construction sector were up at the top, but also the professional and business services sector, with about 45% of those particular employers saying that they were having observing small applicant pools as well. Lack of qualifications and lack of experience or technical skills were also key trouble areas for hiring in these particular industries. And then lastly, the non-technical skills appear to be a particular concern in the utility sector and the other services sector. In this case, we're talking about personal and professional skills, including teamwork, leadership, work ethic, dependability, critical thinking, and so forth. The utility sector also said that they're having a hard time offering competitive wages, and that's why they're having trouble hiring. And then in the professional and business services sector, they may be attracting the people that are the types of workers that they're interested in, but they can't find individuals who have got the industry specific knowledge, skills, and interests. So those who are really interested in energy efficiency work. Let's move to the next slide. In addition to asking about hiring challenges, we asked what the forecast looked like for these energy efficiency employers with regard to their workforce growth. When we talked to these employers, we saw that overall, they were expecting energy efficiency job growth to be about 8% over the next 12 months. So basically from early 2024 to early 2025. That would be equivalent to about 37,000 new energy efficiency jobs added. Now, let's compare that to what we had seen historically between 2019 and or 2018 and 2023. We had actually forecasted about a 9% growth in 2018 to 2019, but we didn't observe that growth in the workforce, in part, we think, because of the pandemic, but for other reasons as well. So, in fact, we observed that the energy efficiency workforce only grew by about 7% from 2018 to 2023, although that was faster growth than the overall average across the nation. In terms of the energy efficiency workforce growth projections over the next 12 months, the other services sector is got a very large growth rate of 16.6%. They are definitely looking at ramping up hiring over the next 12 months. The remaining sectors are looking between about 7 or 8% growth rates over the next year or so. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why we didn't see the growth in the workforce, the energy efficiency sector between 2018 and 2023 that we had originally anticipated. First off, as I mentioned before, we did see a significant drop in employment overall across Canada due to the pandemic in 2020, 21, and 22. But we have seen some rebound from that period of time, and our energy efficiency employment has recovered. But the job growth has been moderated by a number of factors. One factor is that difficulty in hiring qualified energy efficiency workers that we were just talking about. Uh, when an employer wants to hire workers but can't find workers, they're probably not going to fill that spot, and that keeps the workforce smaller. Other issues that came up were delays with associated energy efficiency stock turnover. In this case, we're talking about installing new systems for energy efficiency lighting, energy efficiency heating and equipment, and other energy efficiency technology. It turns out that our stock turnover, we tend to keep our equipment longer, and basically until it dies, and we don't want to replace it with energy efficiency equipment until it dies completely. So that's a little slower than we had anticipated. We also had some policies that took a little bit longer to be implemented than anticipated. And then, in addition, we had delays in energy efficiency investments and provincial policy changes that happened in 2020, again, in conjunction with the pandemic that we saw. The next section of the presentation is going to focus more on each industry in particular. We're going to take a deeper dive into the workforce and the employment income generated from the various different types of industries that we're considering here. So let's move on to the next slide. So starting with the construction sector, we can see that the construction sector, as we said before, has the largest number of energy efficiency establishments and the largest number of energy efficiency workers across Canada. About 42,000 of the 55,000 energy efficiency establishments are in the construction sector, with about 306,000 out of 466,000 of the workers in the energy efficiency sector. Looking at some other statistics about this sector, we see that this sector in the energy efficiency space generated $54.4 billion in energy efficiency revenue and $11 billion in energy efficiency related employment income. Lastly, we also note that of those workers who are considered energy efficiency workers in the construction sector, 65% of them spend all or most of their time on energy efficiency activities. That's an important statistic because we don't necessarily require, or we don't require all of the energy efficiency workers to spend 100% of their time on energy efficiency activities. If they spend some of their time on energy efficiency activities, they're considered an energy efficiency worker. Let's move to the next slide. So the next sector we're going to take a look at is the manufacturing sector here in Canada. A much smaller number of establishments, only 1,300 establishments in the energy efficiency space in the manufacturing sector. And again, a much smaller number in terms of energy efficiency workers, with about 27,000 energy efficiency workers. When we look at the energy efficiency revenue generated in the manufacturing sector, that's about $16.8 billion, with another $1 billion in energy efficiency related employment income. And then lastly, we have again 62% of those energy efficiency workers identified spend all or most of their time on energy efficiency activities. Let's move to the next slide. So the wholesale trade sector is a little bit larger in terms of the number of workers than the manufacturing sector, with about 2,000 energy efficiency establishments and 45,000 energy efficiency workers. The energy efficiency workers spent a little bit less time on energy efficiency activities, only 52% of those workers that were identified as energy efficiency workers spent all or most of their time on energy efficiency activities. Nonetheless, we had about $36.9 billion in energy efficiency revenue in the wholesale trade sector and about $1.9 billion in energy efficiency related employment income. Next slide, please. Professional and business services. Well, first of all, what is this sector? The professional and business services sector includes accounting firms, finance firms. It includes the architects and the engineering consultants, as well as environmental consultants. These are all specialists, knowledge workers, basically. And we see that there were over 6,000 of those establishments across Canada that were engaged in energy efficiency work, with about 50,000 energy efficiency workers across the country. When we look at the proportion of time that's spent on energy efficiency activities, only 42% of those workers, so less than half of those energy efficiency workers, were spending all or most of their time on energy efficiency. So they were having their time split largely across different types of activities. Nonetheless, we had about $15.7 billion in energy efficiency revenue in this sector, as well as about $2 billion or $1.9 billion in energy efficiency related employment income. Next slide. The utility sector, according to our estimates, is, well, first of all, it's a much smaller sector overall. We have only 392 identified energy efficiency establishments in Canada. They're generating about $2.1 billion in energy efficiency revenue and about $296 million in employment income related to energy efficiency activities. What's interesting is that the utility sector in Alberta is actually the second largest employer of energy efficiency workers across Canada, following or after Ontario, and it exceeds that in British Columbia and Quebec. This could have something to do with the deregulated nature of the energy industry in Canada. I'm sorry, the energy efficiency, the energy industry in Alberta, the electricity industry in Alberta. And so we can see that there may be more activity in the energy efficiency space, a little bit more innovation perhaps by the utility sector in the Alberta area because of that more deregulated or privatized industry structure. The last sector we're going to look at is the other services sector. And again, just to remind you, it involves establishments that are in repairing and maintaining things like motor vehicles, machines, equipment, but also non-governmental organizations. They had the highest predicted rate of energy job growth, about 3,000 energy efficiency establishments, roughly speaking, across Canada, in the other services sector, with about 26,000 energy efficiency workers. In terms of the revenue generated, we had $561 million in energy efficiency revenue generated in the other services sector, 640 million in terms of employment income, and 57% of those energy efficiency workers identified spent all or most of their time on energy efficiency. So one thing I'd like to note in terms of the energy efficiency study that I've just presented on is that we've had some interesting results when it comes to the energy efficiency workforce growth across Canada. And I think that is reflective of a lot of environmental work across Canada more broadly, where we had a slower than anticipated growth between 2019 and 2020, 2021 and 2022. And we also see that a lot of energy efficiency workers, like other environmental workers, are not necessarily devoted to those activities 100% of the time. So thank you for listening to the presentation, and let's open up the floor to any questions that you might have.
Hi, Jenny. We do have one question from Trevor. He
Mhm.
said that in the report he couldn't find anywhere with the definition of energy efficiency, and it seems like that term can have different interpretations.
Okay, very good. So let me see. I've got energy efficiency. I've got the uh, study open right here. So let me go in and give a deeper dive. So in generally, in this study, if you look in the Appendix A, the scope and methodology, you'll see that energy efficiency is defined as the production or installation of energy saving products or the provision of services that reduce end use energy consumption. It's a wide range of different types of activities, including manufacturing, energy efficient appliances, and other Energy Star labeled products. But it also includes contracting and building services that provide insulation or improve natural lighting, reduce overall energy consumption across homes and businesses. Let me give you a further definition, which is what is an energy efficiency firm, or what type of firm do we consider to be a qualifying firm? So for this survey, a qualifying firm was any organization with employees in Canada directly involved with researching, developing, producing, manufacturing, distributing, selling, implementing, installing, or repairing components, goods, or services related to energy efficiency. That includes heating, cooling, building envelope or advanced materials, Energy Star appliances, efficient lighting, building controls, or other energy efficiency activities that reduce energy demand. It also refers to establishments involved in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, whether it's thermal or hot water solar, from renewable energy sources, or work that increases energy efficiency of HVAC systems. We also include supporting services such as consulting, finance, tax, and legal services related to energy efficiency goods and services. So I hope that helps clarify how we're defining energy efficiency.
Thanks, Jenny. Um, we also have another question. What skills are energy efficiency employers looking for?
Ah, Well, again, we saw that there's a range of different skills that energy efficiency, there's a range of different types of roles that they're hiring for, and each of those different roles is going to have a different set of skills. Largely speaking, the challenge that employers are having is finding workers who have the technical skills that are specific to energy efficiency equipment or technology. So knowledge of building standards, knowledge of building methodologies, understanding of more advanced HVAC systems and the controls that are required to operate them and to maintain them. So those sorts of things, knowledge of advanced materials, and then other types of activities related to energy efficiency, reducing energy demand across the sector. So I would say mainly those technical skills are in high demand, and that applies not just to the installers and the technicians, but also to the management, because the management and supervisors have to have that knowledge as well, and also the sales team, especially in the wholesale trade sector, where they're going to be expected to know the details about the technical aspects of the equipment that they're selling.
Thank you. We have another question. How does Canada compare to the United States?
Ah, yes. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we had an opportunity to replicate the study that was done in the United States, the U.S. Energy and Employment Jobs Report. We used a similar methodology to them, and that allows us to do a comparison to what is happening in the U.S. We see similar results, largely speaking, across Canada and the US in terms of the workforce. In 2023, in particular, we saw that energy efficiency jobs represented a slightly larger share of the total jobs across Canada than in the United States. In Canada, energy efficiency employment was about 2.6% of the overall workforce. In the US, it was about 1.4% of the overall workforce. Um, Largely speaking, the sub-technologies were the same that dominated, with the HVAC equipment and the LED and energy efficiency lighting at the top of the spectrum. And then in terms of the industries, the construction sector in both of those countries represented the largest proportion of the energy efficiency workforce and enterprises across the both countries.
Awesome. We have another question. It's kind of a two-parter. What technical skills and qualifications are essential for standing out in energy efficiency roles, especially for entry-level positions? For someone transitioning from a different background, could you suggest a step-by-step path with specific courses or certifications to gain these skills and increase hiring competitiveness?
That's a great question. I think one area where you may want to consider getting a little bit of extra information is, again, what's going on in terms of some of these more advanced types of equipment and materials that are being used in the energy efficiency space right now. I can recommend the BCIT. And I'm trying to remember what BCIT stands for. It's an institute that provides a lot of training related to energy efficiency, related to building, related to manufacturing, related to maintenance and repair of equipment as well. So that might be a good place to start if you're interested in finding out more about some relatively low cost ways to get into the sector. I'd also suggest that you check out the Efficiency Canada website. I believe that they have a platform where they have a lot of information about other courses and other types of training and credentials that are needed. So really, depending on what type of work that you're wanting to do, you can find the related technical courses that you would need in order to be able to fall into that workforce. So again, BCIT and Efficiency Canada are two resources that I would recommend checking out.
Thanks, Jenny. Maria also wants to know, how do you anticipate this report will influence support and training for the workforce? In response to these identified needs for technical and non-tech skills, what types of supports, funding, training are being made available currently or planned for the near future?
That's a great question. Well, I think overall, we've got a good understanding that the types of skills that the construction sector has are taking us only so far in terms of energy efficiency. A lot of the apprenticeships for the construction skilled workers are now starting to incorporate more information about these advanced materials and advanced technologies into their programs so that the graduates from those apprenticeship programs are more familiar with that. The challenge comes in making sure that those who have been on the job for quite a while have the necessary skills or have the opportunity to train upskill, to make sure that they understand the new technology and new processes that are required. So in terms of funding opportunities, we do see that the same sorts of um, employment supports for apprenticeships across the board are available for apprenticeships related to energy efficiency work. Those are good opportunities for an individual looking to get into the construction sector. If you're more interested in wholesale trade or professional and technical services, then again, I think when it comes to getting supports, it's probably going to be more either employer driven in terms of financial supports, or if you can find say a Canada job grant opportunity to get some funding for upskilling as well.
Thanks. Someone else wants to know how you project these numbers will change throughout the future for the different services and sectors.
No, that's a very good question. So one thing we found is that there wasn't very much change across the two reports that we've produced, the 2019 report and this 2024 report. In both of those reports, the construction sector was by far the largest employer of energy efficiency workers. The utility sector was the smallest sector. We saw a little bit of growth in all of those sectors, but not quite as much as we would have liked to have seen, with the exception of the wholesale trade sector. And that's actually quite interesting because when we see that the workforce declined in the wholesale trade sector, it might suggest that the wholesale trade sector was contracting. But in fact, the trade sector in the energy efficiency space was growing. We had more energy efficiency activity, but it was in a smaller number of businesses. So we consider that to be a consolidation of the industry. And it's reflective of the maturing of the energy efficiency space in the wholesale trade sector. I think in terms of the projection of the future growth, I think, some of the issues that came up in terms of the slower than anticipated growth for the um, energy efficiency workforce between 2019 or 2018 and 2023 are going to continue to be issues. A relatively slow stock turnover is going to play a role in kind of keeping that growth a little bit slower than anticipated. And we also expect to see that there are going to be hiring challenges. Again, these employers can only grow as fast as they can find workers. And if they are continuing to struggle to find workers, as long as that gap between the demand and supply exists, the workforce is not going to grow quite as quickly as these employers are looking for it to grow.
Thanks, Jenny. Natalie said she thinks you meant CEIT for training. They deliver several certifications programs, um, including certified energy manager and certified energy auditor, etc. So just to
Ah,
know.
yes. Yes, yes. Thank you very much. I apologize for that error. Thank you for correcting me.
And that seems to be all the questions we have. So if nobody has any more questions, you can submit them in the chat right now. But if not, any last words, Jenny?
I'm just hoping that we get another opportunity to continue this research in the future to keep an eye on the energy efficiency workforce space. It's comforting to know that it is growing, although it's not growing quite as quickly as I think some in the space would like it to grow, reflectant of some of these challenges that we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Jenny, for all your words and your presentation. And we're looking forward to the next one as well. Make sure to check out the Eco Canada events and training calendar to see any upcoming webinars and any upcoming events that you may be interested in. And we're looking forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.